I checked my backpack one last time, mentally ticking off each item as I ran my hands through the carefully packed gear. Food, first aid, extra socks, water filter, map, compass, backup map, flashlight, batteries, extra batteries, rain jacket, tent, sleeping bag, cook set, everything in its place. This section of the Appalachian Trail had been on my list for years. At 42, I'd hiked enough miles to know what I was doing. But there was always something special about tackling new territory. The eastern slope had a reputation for stunning views that changed with the seasons, and early autumn seemed like the perfect time to see it. That morning, Riley had stood in our driveway, arms crossed over her light sweater, as a crisp breeze moved her auburn hair. 3 days alone is pushing it, Wayne, she said, pressing a small power bank into my palm. Take this extra one just in case. I tucked it into my side pocket. I'll be fine. Done this 100 times. Not this section. Her brown eyes held mine. You always say every trail has its own personality. I laughed and kissed her goodbye. That's why I married you, always using my own words against me. Someone has to. She smiled against my lips. I'd spent weeks studying the trail maps with Henry. We'd planned to do this hike together until his nephew broke his arm, and Henry had to bow out to help his sister. I could picture him hunched over my dining room table, pointing out the steeper sections with his thick index finger. This stretch here gets slippery after rain, he'd said. And this fork, people miss it all the time. The right path is overgrown. I stepped out of my car at the trailhead parking lot. A few cars were parked, likely belonging to weekend hikers. The mountains loomed ahead, their trees starting to show autumn colors. A uniformed park ranger approached as I adjusted my pack. Her name tag read Moreno, and she carried a clipboard. Morning, she said, glancing at my gear with an experienced eye. Permit? I pulled the paperwork from my pocket and handed it over. Wayne Roach. She looked up from the permit. That's me. Ranger Moreno nodded, making a notation. How long are you planning to be out? 3 days. Going past Miller's Ridge. She handed the permit back. That's the plan. Cell service gets spotty past there, almost non-existent in some parts. She gestured to the mountains. Just so you're prepared. Got it. Thanks. The first mile was always the same, my body adjusting to carrying 35-pound uphill. The trail began wide and well-kept, then narrowed as it wound into the forest. Sunlight broke through the trees, warming the path. The woodland grew denser as I climbed higher. Red oaks and sugar maples closed in on either side, their leaves just beginning to turn. I stopped only to photograph a pair of red-tailed hawks circling above a clearing, and to eat the sandwich Mickey had pressed into my hands that morning at work. Roast beef on sourdough, he'd said proudly, handing over the carefully wrapped package. With that horseradish spread you liked at the company picnic. The sandwich was perfect. Mickey never did anything halfway when it came to food. I sat on a fallen log, eating slowly and taking in the quiet. No cars, no phones, no office chatter, just wind through leaves and occasional bird calls. By late afternoon, my legs felt the miles. According to my watch, I'd covered about 12 miles. Good progress. The sun was getting lower, and I picked up my pace. Roman had sworn by the camping spot at Blackwater Creek, and I wanted to reach it before dark. Best water source on that stretch, he told me on the hiking forum, and flat ground for your tent. Most people miss it because it's a bit off the main trail. I found the creek as the light faded, a rushing stream through a small clearing. The campsite matched Roman's description. A flat area sheltered by pines with a fire ring made of stones. Setting up camp was automatic after years of practice. Tent up, sleeping bag unrolled, cook set arranged on a flat rock near the fire ring. I collected dry wood from the surrounding area, careful to take only fallen branches. The fire caught quickly, small flames growing into a steady blaze. I boiled water for my dehydrated beef stew, stirring it with a spoon as steam rose. The first hot bite filled my stomach with satisfaction after the day's work. That's when I heard it. A strange shuffling sound from the darkness beyond my campfire. A low grunting noise followed, then more shuffling. I paused with my spoon halfway to my mouth, listening. It sounded about 100 feet away, just past where my light reached, probably a deer or a black bear. I finished my dinner with one ear tuned to the darkness, but the sounds didn't come any closer. After eating, I cleaned my cookware with water from the creek and hung my food bag. Then I remembered the bear canister Sawyer had insisted I borrow. "Trust me," he'd said, "these new models are worth the extra weight." Bears around Appalachia are getting smarter about regular food hangs. I transferred my food and scented items into the hard-sided container and secured it about 50 yards from my tent. The bear spray went next to my sleeping bag within easy reach. The shuffling had stopped, but in these mountains, it paid to be careful. I zipped myself into my sleeping bag and listened to the creek and the fading fire. Tomorrow would be another full day of hiking. I closed my eyes, letting the exhaustion of the day pull me toward sleep. I woke up with the sun, my body stiff from sleeping on the ground at Blackwater Creek. After a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal, I packed up camp and checked my map. Today would take me through some challenging sections before reaching Stillwater Summit. I'd been looking forward to this stretch of the trail for months, even though I knew it would test my endurance. The morning began well, but by midday, the trail turned into steep switchbacks that had my calves burning and sweat soaking my shirt. These switchbacks would have been Gary Stevens' worst nightmare. Back in college, my roommate had made it abundantly clear that his fear of heights extended to even the mildest of inclines. I could picture him now, pressed flat against the mountainside, refusing to look down as the trail zigzagged up the steep slope. Poor Gary would have turned back hours ago. I paused to catch my breath on a particularly narrow section of trail, taking a long drink from my water bottle. Looking up, I noticed dark clouds gathering in the distance, moving faster than I'd expected. The temperature had been dropping steadily for the last hour, and my sweat-damp shirt now felt cold against my skin. I pulled my jacket from my pack and slipped it on. Checking my GPS, I was relieved to see I was still on track. The blue dot marking my position lined up perfectly with the trail, and at my current pace, I'd reach Stillwater Summit before nightfall. I tucked the device back into my pocket and pushed on, the muscles in my legs protesting with each uphill step. As the afternoon wore on, the clouds thickened overhead, turning the forest dim and shadowy. The wind picked up, carrying a chill that cut through my jacket. I kept my eyes on the trail ahead, careful of loose rocks and exposed roots that could easily cause a twisted ankle out here. The first time I heard it, I almost convinced myself it was just the wind. A faint shuffling sound somewhere behind me, like feet dragging through leaves. I stopped and turned, scanning the trees, but saw nothing. When I started walking again, so did the sound. As dusk approached and the forest grew darker around me, the noise became more distinct, shuffling and occasional grunting, always maintaining the same distance behind me. I estimated it stayed about 100 feet back, never getting closer, but never falling behind either. I stopped again and listened hard. The sound stopped too. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. "Is someone there?" No response came except for more shuffling, slightly off to my right now. A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. Whatever this was had been following me for miles, keeping pace, but staying hidden. "I can hear you out there," I tried again. If you need help, just say something. Nothing but more rustling leaves and that same odd grunting sound. With the summit still a good hour away and daylight fading fast, I picked up my pace. The sounds followed, matching my speed exactly. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe a deer or some other animal, curious about the human hiking through its territory. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was something else entirely. I reached a rocky overhang just as the last light was leaving the sky. It wasn't the summit I'd planned to reach, but it offered natural shelter and a defensible position with the rock wall at my back. I set up camp quickly, gathering wood for a fire before it got completely dark. With my tent pitched and a small fire crackling, I should have felt secure. Instead, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched from the darkness beyond my firelight. Every snap of a twig in the forest had me peering into the blackness, straining to see what I could only hear. I pulled out my phone, wanting to call Landon. He'd worked as a park ranger before joining the police force, and would know what to make of these strange sounds. But the no service indicator mocked me from the top of my screen. I tried moving to different spots around my camp, holding the phone up high, but nothing changed. With communications cut off, I turned to my GPS to plan the quickest route out for tomorrow. If whatever was following me meant harm, I wanted options. The device powered on, but instead of showing my location, the screen flickered and displayed a jumble of corrupted coordinates, numbers, and symbols that made no sense. "Come on," I muttered, tapping the screen. I tried restarting it, remembering how my father had insisted on buying me this particular Garmin model. "Most reliable one out there, Wayne," Scott had said, in that authoritative tone he always used for outdoor equipment advice. "This one won't let you down." The screen lit up briefly with the startup logo, then went completely dark. I tried the power button again and again, but nothing happened. The battery had been at 85% just hours earlier. It shouldn't have died so suddenly. I added more wood to the fire, trying to push back the darkness. That's when I noticed an unusual fog rolling in between the trees. It moved against the wind. In all my research with Addie Williamson, the local guide who knew these mountains well, she had never mentioned fog patterns like this. Addie had taught me about mountain weather, how to read clouds, what wind patterns meant, and when to expect rain or snow. But this fog was different. It flowed around trees, reaching out with tendrils that probed the darkness. The fire sputtered as the damp air surrounded my camp. I zipped my jacket up to my chin and added the last of my gathered wood to the flames. The shuffling sounds had stopped, but somehow that was worse, replaced by a silence so complete. It felt smothering. The fog continued to thicken around me, obscuring the trees just 20 feet away. My fire provided the only light now, a small orange circle in a sea of impenetrable white. I pulled my sleeping bag closer to the flames, watching as the fog crept ever closer to my small, fragile circle of warmth. I woke with a start, my neck stiff from sleeping, hunched against the rocky overhang. The fire had died to embers, giving off barely any heat. But that wasn't what made my skin prickle. The fog that had rolled in last night hadn't dissipated with morning. It had thickened into something I could almost touch. Dense white vapor pressed against me from all sides, limiting my vision to just a few feet ahead. Swallowing hard, I reached for my water bottle and took a long drink. The water tasted metallic. Or maybe that was just the fear coating my tongue. I couldn't see the trees, the trail, or even the rising sun. Just white, pressing white. I packed up my gear with clumsy, hurried movements. My fingers fumbled with the tent stakes as I pulled them from the ground. The silence was complete, except for my own breathing and the rustle of nylon as I stuffed the tent into its sack. No birds called, No insects buzzed, nothing. "Get it together," I muttered to myself, my voice swallowed by the fog. Once I had everything packed away, I slung my backpack over my shoulders and tried to orient myself. I needed to get back to the main trail. But as I took a few cautious steps away from my campsite, nothing looked right. I thought I was heading back the way I'd come, but the ground felt different underfoot. Softer, with a thick carpet of leaves I hadn't noticed before. I stopped and turned around, trying to spot any familiar landmark. There should have been the rocky overhang where I'd made camp, but I couldn't see it anymore. I took a deep breath and kept walking, hoping to find one of the yellow trail markers that would guide me back. After 20 minutes of careful navigation, I still hadn't found a single marker. The trees that occasionally emerged from the fog looked wrong, older and more gnarled than I remembered. Their trunks twisted in unnatural spirals, bark furrowed deep like ancient skin. Branches reached out like arthritic fingers, some nearly touching the ground. Dr. Dorothy Turner would have been fascinated by these trees. I remembered her lecture at the community center last year about old growth forests in the Appalachians. She'd spoken about trees that had stood for centuries, witnessing history while humans came and went. These looked like they belonged in one of her slide presentations, primitive, almost prehistoric in their appearance. "Quercus montana," I said aloud, recalling the Latin name for chestnut oak she taught us. But even as I named them, I knew these trees were different somehow. The fog curled around their trunks like it was alive, caressing the bark with tendrils that seemed to move with purpose. I pulled out my compass, grateful I'd packed it, despite also having the GPS. The little needle swung before settling, pointing north. I oriented myself and began walking east, which should have taken me back toward the main trail. The GPS remained dead, its screen black and unresponsive despite my attempts to restart it. Hours passed as I hiked through the strange forest. My watch said it was nearly noon, but the light filtering through the fog remained dim and diffuse, with no hint of the sun's position. My calves ached from the constant walking, and sweat dampened my shirt, despite the cool air. The shuffling sound returned, but closer now. No longer 100 feet away as it had been yesterday, but perhaps 70 feet behind me. The occasional grunt that accompanied it sounded deeper, more purposeful. I walked faster, pushing through the fog with my free hand, while the other gripped my hiking pole. My heart pounded against my ribs and my mouth went dry. I told myself it was just an animal, a bear maybe, or a wild boar. But deep down, I knew better. The fog parted briefly, opening like a theater curtain to reveal a small clearing ahead. That's when I saw it. The figure stood perfectly still among the twisted trees. Humanoid in shape, it wore what looked like tattered dark clothing that hung in strips from its frame. But where a head should have been, a skull gleamed with a faint bluish light, its eye sockets empty, but somehow watching me. I could make out each individual bone, white and clean, as if freshly prepared for a medical display. As I stared, frozen in place, the figure slowly raised an arm. Long skeletal fingers extended toward me, curling in a beckoning gesture that was unmistakable in its meaning. Come. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. My hiking pole slipped from my numb fingers and clattered to the ground. In all of Norman Welch's wilderness survival classes, there had never been a section on dealing with ghostly apparitions. I thought about his practical advice for animal encounters. Make yourself look big, back away slowly. Don't run, but nothing about what to do when faced with a skeleton with a glowing skull. The figure remained still, arm extended, those bony fingers still beckoning. Then it took a step backward, the movement oddly fluid for something made of bone. It gestured again, more insistently this time, And despite the terror that had my legs locked in place, I felt something new. A strange, subtle pull in my mind. A curiosity that didn't feel entirely my own. What did it want? Where was it trying to lead me? The pull grew stronger, from a gentle tug to an overwhelming force that seemed to reach inside my brain and rewire my thoughts. It wasn't physical. I couldn't feel anything touching me, but my consciousness bent toward the figure like a compass needle drawn to north. I took one step forward, then another. My body moved while my mind screamed in protest. This wasn't right. I should be running in the opposite direction. I should be getting as far away as possible from this impossible thing, but I couldn't resist. The compulsion overrode everything. My training, my instincts, my fear. The figure turned and began to move through the forest. Its form occasionally obscured by fog, but always visible enough to follow. And follow I did, my feet carrying me forward against my will, deeper into the unknown forest that wasn't on any map I'd studied. The skeletal figure glided between trees, never looking back, but somehow always aware of my presence, and I followed, helpless to do anything else. As the fog closed in behind us, erasing any hope of finding my way back, I followed the figure through the woods, unable to resist the pull in my mind. My feet moved forward against my will, drawn by a force I couldn't fight. It felt strange yet familiar, as if it had found a connection inside my head. The trees around us grew older as we walked, their trunks wider and bark more gnarled. I tried to memorize landmarks, a lightning-struck oak, a rock that looked like a turtle. But each time I turned back, the fog had swallowed them. We climbed steadily upward, the incline gentle but persistent. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my voice sounding wrong in the heavy silence. The figure didn't respond. It moved with unnatural fluidity, gliding between trees with that same blue glow coming from its skull. The tattered dark clothing hung from its frame, never catching on branches or undergrowth. As we climbed higher, the fog thinned. Patches of sky appeared above us, but I couldn't tell if it was day or night. The walking should have tired me, but I felt no fatigue, just a strong urge to keep going. Nothing about this area looked familiar. The forest here seemed untouched by human hands. Primeval in a way that made me think of my grandfather's stories. Scott used to tell me about old places in these mountains, spots where the land stayed the same while the world around them changed. Some hollows haven't changed since before white men came, he told me once. The Indians knew to leave them be. Smart man does the same. I wasn't being smart now. I knew that with complete clarity, but I couldn't stop myself. After what my watch said was an hour of walking, though time felt stretched and elastic here, the trees opened up. We stepped into a clearing where the fog lifted completely, as if held back by an invisible barrier. I stopped at the edge, taking in what lay before me. A small cemetery spread across the clearing, surrounded by crumbling stone walls that stood no higher than my waist. Headstones tilted at odd angles throughout the space, weathered by countless seasons. Even from here, I could make out dates, carved into some early 1800s from what I could see. The grass grew tall between the graves, dotted with small white flowers I didn't recognize. "Wayne." She wrapped her arms around me, squeezing tight enough that I winced from my scratches. "Thank God you're okay." She pulled back, her hands still on my shoulders as she studied my face. "What happened to you? You were supposed to be back yesterday." I tried to smile, but felt the expression fall flat. "Got a little lost, that's all." Riley's eyes narrowed as she took in my torn clothes and the bandages the park doctor had applied. "Lost? You never get lost." She touched my cheek gently. "Come inside. You look like you need to sit down." Our living room felt surreal after what I'd experienced. The normal couch, the coffee table, with magazines neatly stacked, family photos on the wall, everything exactly as I'd left it, while I felt completely different. "Let me get you some water," Riley said, heading to the kitchen. "When was the last time you ate something real?" I sank onto the couch, my muscles aching from the tension I'd been holding. "The Rangers gave me something at the station." I rubbed my face, feeling the scratch of stubble. "I'm mostly just tired." Riley returned with water and sat beside me, waiting. I knew she wanted the full story, but how could I tell her what I'd seen? The skeletal figure with its blue glow, my own name on a headstone. Even in my head, it sounded crazy. "I went off trail," I began, choosing my words carefully. "Got turned around in some fog. It was weird. Thicker than anything I've seen before. Couldn't see more than a few feet ahead." "You went off trail?" Riley's voice rose slightly. "That's not like you at all." I nodded, taking a long drink of water. "I know. I made a mistake. Got disoriented. My GPS died, and when it came back on, I was miles from where I thought I was. All true, if incomplete. But you're okay now." Her hand found mine, squeezing gently. "Yeah," I lied. "Just shaken up." The Rangers were about to send out a search party when I walked out. Riley listened as I shared more sanitized details. Getting lost, spending an extra night in the woods, finding my way back. I omitted anything supernatural. Nothing about being pulled through the forest against my will. Nothing about the cemetery. Nothing about seeing my own grave. "You should get some rest," she said when I finished, brushing hair from my forehead. "You look exhausted." That night, I lay awake long after Riley fell asleep, staring at the ceiling, afraid to close my eyes. Every time I did, I saw that skull glowing blue in the forest fog. 2 weeks later, I sat in Walter Garcia's office, on the edge of a leather armchair. Walter had been my friend since college, and sometimes acted as my therapist when life got complicated. His office had plants by the windows, degrees on the walls, and a tidy desk. "So, you're saying you had an episode out there?" Walter asked, his voice steady. I'd finally decided to tell someone after nights of broken sleep. Not everything. Not yet. But I felt like I had to talk to someone before I lost my mind completely. "I'm not sure what to call it," I said, rubbing my thumb against the chair's leather. "It felt real, Walter. Too real." I told him more than I told Riley. About the fog that moves strangely, the feeling of being compelled to walk against my will, following something through the woods. I hesitated before mentioning the skeletal figure, watching Walter's face carefully for signs of judgment. "I know how it sounds," I added quickly. Walter leaned forward, his notebook on his knee. "The human mind reacts to stress in interesting ways, Wayne. Under extreme conditions like isolation, fear, exhaustion, and dehydration, our brains can create vivid experiences. You think I hallucinated the whole thing? I think you experienced something your brain constructed to make sense of a frightening situation." Walter's tone was gentle but clinical. "You got lost in difficult conditions. Your GPS failed. These are objectively stressful circumstances. The ranger said you were dehydrated when you came out." I wanted to argue, but found myself nodding instead. This was exactly why I'd come to Walter, for a rational explanation that might help me sleep again. "The mind creates stories from chaos," he said. "It's a survival mechanism. Sometimes those stories can seem supernatural because our brains process unexpected threats that way. So all of it, the figure, the cemetery," I trailed off, not mentioning the grave with my name. "Products of exhaustion and fear," Walter said. "The brain, under stress, can create experiences that feel real." I left Walter's office with a prescription for mild sleeping pills and a rational explanation I desperately wanted to believe. Hallucinations made sense. Being led through the woods by a skeletal figure to see my own grave didn't. The pills helped me sleep, but they couldn't stop the dreams. Night after night, I found myself back in that cemetery, kneeling before my own headstone. Sometimes the skeletal figure spoke, though I never remembered its words upon waking. Other times, I watched myself climb into the open grave, dirt falling onto my face as I lay down. I'd wake gasping, checking the time, always 3:17 in the morning. Riley would stir beside me, and I'd lie that it was nothing, just a bad dream. Go back to sleep. But we both knew something had changed. I caught her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. Concern etched on her face. At Sunday dinner with my parents 2 months after the incident, my dad grilled steaks while Mom asked pointed questions about my hiking accident. I stuck to the official story, got lost, spent an extra night out there. Rangers found me. My brother Marcus studied me from across the table, clearly not buying it. After dinner, he cornered me in the kitchen while I was helping with dishes. "What really happened out there?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "I told you," I said, focusing too intently on drying a plate. "I got lost. Bullshit." Marcus took the plate from my hands. "You've never gotten lost a day in your life. You sleep with a compass under your pillow." I almost smiled at that. "People make mistakes. Not you. Not about this." His eyes searched mine. "Something happened out there, and it's eating you up." For a moment, I considered telling him everything. Marcus and I had never kept secrets from each other, but the words stuck in my throat. How could I explain something I didn't understand myself? "I just need some time," I said finally. "I'm working through it." He looked disappointed, but nodded. "When you're ready to talk, I'm here." But I wasn't ready. Not with Marcus, not with anyone. Instead, I threw myself into research, spending hours after Riley went to bed, searching online for accounts similar to mine. I found scattered stories, hikers describing time slips in the Appalachians, strange fog that seemed to have a mind of its own, unexplained structures deep in the woods that couldn't be found again. Most were dismissed as tall tales or the confused recollections of lost hikers, but there were patterns. References to deathwalkers in Cherokee legends. Colonial-era accounts of bone men who led travelers astray. Appalachian folklore about spirit guides who appeared to those marked for crossing. One night, I found a forum thread about a hiker who claimed to have been led to an old graveyard by a figure with no face somewhere in the Blue Ridge Mountains. The account was vague, posted years ago with no follow-up comments. I sent a private message that went unanswered. In an academic paper on Appalachian death omens, I read about travelers who reported being followed by unexplained sounds, rustling leaves, breaking twigs, sometimes low grunts or whispers, always maintaining the same distance. The paper called it the follower phenomenon, documented but unexplained. Each new piece of information convinced me that what I'd experienced wasn't a hallucination. The similarities were too specific, the patterns too consistent across decades of accounts. 4 months after my encounter, I sat at the kitchen table late at night, surrounded by printouts and notes, my laptop open to a topographical map of the area where I'd gotten lost. I had marked the exact GPS coordinates where I'd regained consciousness after the cemetery vision. Riley found me there, coming downstairs for water. She stood in the doorway watching me with tired eyes. "It's 2:00 in the morning, Wayne," she said softly. "I know. I'll come up soon." She came closer, looking at my scattered papers. "You're planning to go back there?" It wasn't a question. I nodded, not looking up. "Why? What are you hoping to find?" "Answers," I said. "Proof that I'm not going crazy." Riley sat down across from me, pushing aside some papers to make space. "You don't have to prove anything to me." "It's not about that." I finally met her eyes. "It's about proving it to myself. I need to know what happened was real. And if you find nothing, then Walter was right." I hallucinated the whole thing. The possibility both relieved and disappointed me. And if you find whatever you're looking for? I had no answer for that. What would it mean if the cemetery was real? If my grave was waiting for me? Riley reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Don't go alone, please. I won't, I promised, already knowing who I needed to take with me. I spent the next week refining my plan, mapping the exact route we would need to follow. I plotted the coordinates, studied satellite images of the area, and created a detailed itinerary. I pulled out my hiking gear, checking everything twice. When everything was ready, I called my cousin, Alexander Ree, a former wilderness guide with years of backcountry experience. Alexander had always been the skeptical one in the family. Practical, grounded, impossible to fool. If anyone could help me separate reality from delusion, it was him. I need your help with something, I said when he answered. Something weird happened to me on a hike a few months back. The time you got lost? Alexander asked. Heard about that from your dad. Said you were pretty shaken up. There's more to the story, I said. A lot more. And I need someone I trust to help me figure it out. This sounds serious, he said, his tone shifting. What exactly are we talking about? I took a deep breath, deciding how much to share over the phone. I think I found something out there. Something that shouldn't exist. I need to go back and check, but I don't want to go alone. There was a long pause before Alexander answered, When do we leave? I watched Alexander toss his hiking pack into the back of his truck, with more force than necessary. His skepticism had been evident from the moment I'd called him 6 months after my experience, but he'd still agreed to come. You know, he said, slamming the tailgate shut. Most people just go to therapy when they have recurring nightmares. They don't drag their cousins back to the scene of the crime. I told you it wasn't a nightmare, I said, checking my own gear one last time. And I went to therapy. Walter thinks it was a stress hallucination. Alexander raised an eyebrow. And you don't believe your actual therapist friend because... I pulled out my phone and showed him the GPS coordinates I'd saved that morning after waking up in the forest. Because I woke up 4 miles from where I should have been. Because my GPS suddenly started working again after being dead. Because everything I experienced felt too real. He took the phone, studying the numbers on the screen. His expression softened slightly. Alexander had always been the practical one between us, but he was fair. So, what's the plan exactly? We follow these coordinates and find what? A skeleton man in your grave? I nodded, taking my phone back. We retrace my journey. I need to know if that cemetery is real. If it is, then everything else might be real too. Alexander sighed, looking up at the clear blue sky. Fine. But when we find nothing but trees and rocks, you promise to drop this. Okay, move on with your life. Take the sleeping pills Walter prescribed and tell Riley you're all better. Deal, I said, though I wasn't sure I could keep that promise. 6 months after my first encounter, we set off toward the Appalachian trailhead, our trucks loaded with full hiking gear and camping equipment. The drive was quiet. I could tell Alexander was humoring me, treating this like some kind of therapeutic closure exercise rather than an actual investigation. As we parked at the trailhead and shouldered our packs, I felt a strange mixture of dread and determination wash over me. The forest looked so normal in the morning light. Green leaves, birdsong, other hikers chatting nearby. It was hard to believe that somewhere within these woods lay a place that had nearly broken my mind. You okay? Alexander asked, watching me stare at the tree line. Yeah, I lied, adjusting my pack straps. Let's go. We entered the forest following the same marked trail I'd taken during my solo hike. Every step felt like déjà vu, but without the fog, without the compulsion. Everything looked different. We hiked for hours, making good time along the established paths. "See, nothing scary about these woods," Alexander said, stopping to take a drink from his water bottle. "It's just trees, cousin. Been here for thousands of years. They're not interested in us." I nodded, not wanting to argue. The first day continued without incident, exactly as the beat had said it would. We covered almost 15 miles before setting up camp at a designated site where several other hikers were already settled. The normalcy of it all, the ordinary conversations around other campfires, the familiar routine of setting up tents, helped ease my anxiety. Alexander kept the mood light throughout the evening, telling stories about his own wilderness adventures and occasionally poking fun at my ghost story. "You know," he said, tossing us another small log onto our fire, "ghost stories belong around campfires, not in real life. That's what my dad always said." "Your dad also thought Bigfoot was secretly working for the government," I reminded him. Alexander laughed. "Touché. Still, there's a big difference between getting lost in the woods and being led to your own grave by a glowing skeleton." I didn't respond, just stared into the fire, remembering the blue light from the skull's eye sockets. The next morning came early. We packed up and continued along the marked trail for another few hours, until we reached the point where, according to my GPS, I had veered off 6 months ago. "This is it," I said, stopping at a fork in the path. "From here we go off trail." Alexander frowned. "You sure? These trails exist for a reason. Going off course is how people get lost." "That's the point," I explained. "I got lost. I need to go back to where I ended up." I pulled out my phone and checked the GPS coordinates I'd recorded. According to the device, we needed to head northeast away from any established paths. "Fine," Alexander sighed, adjusting his pack. "But I'm marking our trail as we go. I don't want both of us getting rescued by rangers this time." We left the safety of the marked path, pushing through underbrush and navigating around fallen trees. The terrain quickly became challenging. Without a trail to follow, we had to make our own way up steep inclines and across small streams. After an hour, Alexander's complaints grew more frequent. "This is insane," he said, stopping to catch his breath. "There's no path here, because nobody comes this way. There's a reason for that." "We're getting close," I insisted, though I had no way of knowing if that was true. The forest around us looked unfamiliar. No twisted trees, no unnatural fog. "Close to what?" Alexander asked, exasperated. "We've been hiking for hours, through practically untouched wilderness. There's nothing out here, Wayne. No cemetery, no graves, nothing but trees and rocks." "Just a little further," I said, pushing ahead. The afternoon wore on as we climbed higher into the mountains. The terrain became increasingly difficult, with steep slopes and thick vegetation slowing our progress. My legs burned with effort, and sweat soaked through my shirt, despite the cool air. Alexander repeated his doubts like a mantra. "There's nothing out here. This is a waste of time. We should head back to the main trail before dark." I was beginning to think he might be right when I spotted something familiar. A rock formation jutting from the hillside. It was shaped roughly like a turtle, with a domed top and a protruding section that resembled a head. "Wait," I said, stopping abruptly. "I know this place." Alexander came up beside me, breathing heavily. "What, this random rock?" "Yes," I said, my heart racing. "I saw this on my way to the cemetery. I tried to use it as a landmark." Alexander looked at me skeptically. "Wayne, there are a million rocks in these mountains that look like animals if you stare at them long enough." "No, it's this one," I insisted. "We're getting close." Despite his continued protests, Alexander followed, as I pressed on with renewed energy. We hiked for another hour until the sun began to set, and we were forced to make camp in a small clearing surrounded by pines. As we set up the tents and built a fire, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The forest had grown quiet, too quiet, with none of the usual evening bird calls or rustling of small animals. "We'll continue in the morning," I said, sitting close to the fire. "I think we're very close now." Alexander rolled his eyes, but didn't argue further. We ate a simple dinner of dehydrated stew and talked about mundane things, work, family, anything but why we were really there. Eventually, Alexander crawled into his tent, leaving me alone by the fire. I sat there for nearly an hour, listening to the crackling flames and the occasional pop of sap in the wood. The night was clear and cold, with stars visible through the gaps in the canopy above. I was about to turn in myself when I heard it. The shuffling sound. It started faint, just a gentle shifting of leaves about 100 feet from our camp. Exactly as I remembered it. Then came the soft grunting, almost too quiet to hear over the fire. My blood ran cold. I sat perfectly still, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The sounds continued, maintaining that exact distance, not coming closer, but not retreating either. Just there, watching, waiting, I heard Alexander's tent zip open. "What the hell is that?" he whispered, poking his head out. "You hear it?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Alexander crawled out of his tent completely, his headlamp casting a weak beam into the darkness beyond our camp. "Yeah, I hear it," he said, reaching for his walking stick. "Sounds like something circling us." The shuffling stopped for a moment, then resumed, still keeping its distance. Alexander looked at me, the skepticism in his eyes replaced by something I hadn't seen before. Uncertainty, and behind that, the first glimmer of fear. I woke before dawn, staring at the canvas of my tent. As the nightmare faded, the same dream again, standing in front of my own headstone. Next to me, I heard Alexander rustling in his sleeping bag. We'd both slept poorly after those sounds circled our camp last night. "We should pack up," I called over to him. "Yeah, sure." His voice sounded hollow, nothing like his usual confident tone. We emerged from our tents into the gray morning light. Alexander kept glancing into the trees as he rolled his sleeping bag. I noticed his hands shaking slightly. "About last night," he said, stuffing his sleeping bag into its compression sack with more force than necessary. "Probably just a deer, or maybe a bear checking us out." I nodded, but didn't argue. I knew what we'd heard wasn't wildlife. The shuffling had been too deliberate, too persistent, too familiar. "Could have been," I said, letting him hold on to that explanation if it helped. We ate energy bars in silence and filled our water bottles from the small stream nearby. The water tasted clean and cold, nothing like the metallic tang I'd experienced during my first encounter in these woods. Alexander took longer than usual to break down his tent. His movements mechanical. I caught him, staring at the same tree line where the sounds had come from. His eyes kept darting between shadows. "We can head back if you want," I offered, though I had no intention of leaving. He straightened his back. "No way. We came to find your cemetery, and that's what we're doing." We shouldered our packs and continued northeast, following the GPS coordinates I'd saved months ago. The terrain grew steeper, forcing us to use our hands occasionally to pull ourselves up rocky sections. The forest here felt different than the typical Appalachian woods. The trees grew at odd angles, their trunks thicker and bark deeper with furrows than seemed natural. "Not exactly a tourist spot," Alexander muttered as he used his walking stick to push aside a thorny bush. By midday, sweat soaked through our shirts despite the cool temperature. We paused on a flat rock to share a bag of trail mix. Alexander had grown quieter with each mile, his earlier attempts to rationalize last night's sounds replaced with tense silence. "We should be getting close," I said, checking the GPS again. "Another mile, maybe less." He nodded, chewing methodically. And if we find nothing, then I'll admit I was wrong. The lie came easily. I knew what waited ahead. We continued climbing through the afternoon, the forest growing more dense. Pine needles cushioned our footsteps, making our progress eerily silent. I led the way with Alexander a few steps behind. As we crested a small ridge around 3, Alexander stopped so abruptly, I nearly bumped into him when I turned back. "What the hell?" he whispered. I followed his gaze and saw it. The cemetery exactly as I remembered. The crumbling stone wall encircled the plot of land, headstones tilting at various angles across the open clearing. The tall grass waved slightly in the breeze, dotted with small white flowers. Alexander's face had drained of color. He stared at the cemetery with his mouth slightly open. All his skepticism evaporated in an instant. "You see it too," I said. "Not a question." He nodded slowly. "How is this? It's not on any map." His voice barely carried over the gentle rustle of leaves. "Told you." The words came out more bitter than I intended. We stood at the edge of the clearing for several minutes. I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I wasn't crazy. It was real. Alexander could see it too. "Let's go closer," I finally said. Alexander hesitated, then nodded. We stepped into the clearing, the ground beneath our feet changing from forest floor to overgrown grass. I led the way through the gap in the wall, just as I had that foggy day 6 months ago. Unlike my first visit, there was no fog now, no compulsion pulling me forward, just the sickening knowledge of what waited at the center of the cemetery. "These dates," Alexander said, kneeling beside one of the headstones. "Some of these go back to the early 1800s. I barely heard him. My eyes were fixed on the center of the cemetery, where a gleaming marble headstone stood upright among the weathered markers. My feet carried me toward it, while Alexander continued examining the other graves. When I reached the headstone, my stomach dropped. The name Wayne Roach was still carved into the polished surface, along with my birth date and today's date. But something had changed. The grave itself looked different. The once smooth mound of earth had been disturbed, turned over, and partially dug out, as if something had been clawing its way either in or out. "Alexander," I called, my voice cracking. He jogged over, his face still showing disbelief. When he saw the headstone, he stopped short. That's your name." His eyes widened as he read the dates. "And today's date is the..." He couldn't finish the sentence. Alexander reached out slowly, touching the cold marble with his fingertips. He pulled back as if burned, then touched it again more firmly. "It's real," he said, "completely solid, not a hallucination." He looked at the disturbed earth in front of the stone. "What happened here? Did you dig at this last time?" I shook my head. "No, it was just a mound of fresh dirt before. Someone or something has been digging." Alexander took a step back. "What does this mean? I don't understand any of this." I stared at the freshly turned soil of what was supposedly my own grave. Clumps of dirt had been scattered around the base of the headstone. Whatever had been digging hadn't used tools. The marks looked more like something had used hands or claws. "I don't know," I said truthfully. "But I think something was waiting for me that night, and it's still waiting now." Alexander pulled out his phone. "We need evidence. No one will believe this otherwise." He started taking photos, circling the headstone and capturing it from multiple angles. I joined him using my own phone to document everything: the cemetery layout, the wall, the other headstones, and finally my own grave with its disturbed earth. "We should go," I said, after we'd taken dozens of pictures. The shadows in the clearing had lengthened, and I had no desire to be here after dark. Alexander nodded, looking relieved at the suggestion. "Yeah, let's get the hell out of here." We backed away from the headstone, neither of us willing to turn our backs on it until we reached the cemetery wall. As we stepped through the gap in the stone wall, I glanced over my shoulder one last time. That's when I saw it standing at the tree line on the far side of the cemetery. The skeletal figure, its skull glowing with that same faint blue light. It stood perfectly still among the trees, watching. I grabbed Alexander's arm. "Do you see that at the tree line?" He squinted, looking exactly where I pointed. "See what? There's nothing there," but it was there. The figure wore the same tattered dark clothing, its clean white bones visible beneath the fabric. As we stood there, it slowly raised a bony hand toward me. Not beckoning this time, but almost like a greeting or a warning. A message meant only for me. "Never mind," I mumbled, tugging Alexander's arm. "Let's go fast." We turned and walked quickly into the forest, leaving the cemetery behind. But I could feel the hollow eye sockets of the skeleton watching me, tracking my departure, patient and waiting, because it knew somehow that I would return. Alexander and I arrived back at the ranger station, just as the sun was going down, our legs heavy from the hurried descent. We hadn't spoken much since leaving the cemetery, both of us processing what we'd seen in our own ways. His normally skeptical expression had given way to something I recognized. The face of someone whose worldview had just been shattered. "You ready for this?" I asked as we stepped into the fluorescent glare of the station's front office. "Not even a little," Alexander muttered, pulling out his phone where he'd stored the photos. We'd called ahead, so Forest Service investigator Kelsey Rios was waiting for us. A slim woman with her brown hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore hiking pants and a button-up shirt with the Forest Service logo, looking more like she belonged on a trail than behind the desk where she sat. "Mr. Roach." She stood and extended her hand. "I'm Investigator Rios. You mentioned finding something unusual during your hike." I shook her hand. "Yes, a cemetery that doesn't seem to be on any of your maps." Her expression didn't change, but I caught the slight tilt of her head, the look of someone who'd heard plenty of strange stories from hikers over the years. "And you have photos?" she asked, gesturing for us to sit in the chairs across from her desk. Alexander connected his phone to her computer, and soon the images filled her monitor. I watched her face carefully as she clicked through them. The crumbling wall, the tilted headstones, the dates from the 1800s, and finally the gleaming marble headstone with my name on it. "This is?" She paused, leaning closer to the screen. "You're saying this headstone has your name? Wayne Roach?" "Yes," I said, "and my birth date and today's date." She glanced at me, then back at the screen, and the disturbed earth like something had been digging. Alexander added, speaking for the first time since we'd entered. The grave was empty. Rios made notes on a pad beside her, asking us for the exact coordinates. I provided them from my GPS, and she pulled up a topographical map of the area. "There's nothing marked here," she said after studying it. "No historical sites, no cemeteries, nothing of significance. Just forest." "Well, we didn't imagine it," Alexander said, a defensive edge in his voice. "The photos are right there." "I'm not saying you did," she replied calmly. "I'd like to organize a team to check this out. A pioneer cemetery would be a significant historical find, not to mention the unusual nature of what you've described." She excused herself to make some calls, leaving Alexander and me sitting in uncomfortable silence. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, making the scratches on my arms stand out like chalk marks on dark pavement. "You think they'll find it?" Alexander asked quietly. I shrugged. "I don't know. Part of me hopes they don't." 2 days later, we joined a search party led by Captain Silas Torres, a tall man with a bald head and authoritative presence. He organized a team of 6 rangers, Alexander and me, splitting us into 3 groups to approach the area from different angles. We all had copies of our photos and the GPS coordinates. Standard grid search pattern, Torres instructed as we gathered at the trailhead. Radio check-ins every 30 minutes. If you find anything resembling what's in these photos, call it in immediately. Do not approach any structures without backup. The morning stretched into afternoon as we combed through miles of forest. My group followed the exact path Alexander and I had taken just days before. I recognized landmarks, the fork in the trail, the distinctive rock formation, even the clearing where we'd camped, and heard the shuffling sounds. But when we reached the coordinates where the cemetery should have been, we found nothing but undisturbed forest. No crumbling wall, no tilted headstones, no marble monument with my name. "This is it," I insisted, checking my GPS again. "This is exactly where we were." Torres knelt to examine the ground. "No signs of disturbance here. No evidence of any structures, recent or historical." "That's impossible," I said, pulling out my phone. "Look at the photos. Look at the timestamp. We were here 3 days ago." Torres studied my phone, comparing the images to our surroundings. The other search teams reported in. Nothing found in their assigned areas either. "Could you have recorded the coordinates incorrectly?" Torres asked. "No," Alexander said firmly, joining us after searching nearby with his team. "We checked multiple times. This is the spot." The search continued for another day, expanding outward from the original coordinates, but yielded nothing. As the Rangers packed up their equipment, I overheard Torres speaking quietly to Rios. "Either those photos were manipulated or—" He shook his head. "Or what?" Rios pressed. "Or something very strange is happening in these woods." Back at the station, Rios downloaded the photos from both our phones and examined them on the larger computer screen. She ran them through some kind of analysis software. "No signs of digital manipulation," she concluded, sitting back in her chair. "These photos were taken when and where you say they were, but what they show simply isn't there." Alexander and I exchanged glances. The photos remained clear and unchanged on the screen. The cemetery, the headstones, my name carved in marble. "What happens now?" I asked. Rios closed the file inside. "Officially, we'll record this as an unverified report. The photos will be archived, and we'll make note of the coordinates for future reference." She paused. "Unofficially, I've worked these mountains for 12 years, and I've heard stories, things people have seen that can't be explained." She didn't elaborate, and I didn't ask her to. Some truths are better left unspoken. On the drive home, Alexander was quiet, staring out the window at the passing trees. "You believe me now," I said. It wasn't a question. "I believe we both saw something," he replied carefully. "I believe we both have the same photos of something that apparently doesn't exist." He turned to look at me. "But what does that mean, Wayne?" I didn't have an answer for him then. I'm not sure I have one now. I made a decision that night. I would never return to that section of the Appalachian. Whatever waited for me there, whatever had shown me my own grave, could continue waiting. I wasn't going to seek it out again. In the months that followed, I tried to resume my normal life. I started hiking again, but chose new trails in different mountain ranges. The Blue Ridge, the Smokies, places where the trees felt younger and the paths more traveled. Riley noticed the change in me. How could she not? I checked the locks twice before bed now. I kept a light on in the hallway. Small things easy to dismiss as new habits, but they added up. "You seem better when you're hiking," she told me one evening as we sat on the back porch, watching fireflies rise from the grass. "More like yourself." I nodded, not telling her that I never felt like myself anymore. The experience had permanently changed me. I saw the world differently now, always aware of the thin places, The spots where what we know brushes up against something else entirely. The first time it happened, I thought I was dreaming. 3:00 in the morning, the house silent except for Riley's steady breathing beside me. Then I heard it, the shuffling sound. The same sound that had followed me in the forest. I sat up, heart racing, and listened. It came again outside our bedroom window, shuffling, grunting, maintaining that same disturbing distance of about 100 feet, close enough to hear, too far to see clearly in the darkness. "Riley," I whispered, shaking her shoulder. "Riley, wake up." She blinked at me, confused. "What is it?" "Listen," I said. "Can you hear that?" We sat in silence for a full minute. The shuffling continued, moving around the perimeter of our yard. "I don't hear anything," she finally said, touching my arm. "Bad dream." But it wasn't a dream. It happened again the following month, and the month after that. Always at night, always keeping its distance. I would wake Riley each time, but she never heard a thing. Eventually, I stopped trying to convince her. I keep the photos in my desk drawer, locked away where Riley won't accidentally find them. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the house, I take them out just to confirm I didn't imagine the whole thing. The images never change. The cemetery, the headstones, my name carved in stone, along with a date that has come and gone. Alexander and I don't talk about it much anymore. He sent me copies of all his photos, then deleted them from his own devices. "For your records," he said. What he meant was, I don't want this following me, but it does follow me. Whatever marked me that day in the forest isn't finished. I know that somewhere in the mountains, a grave with my name remains open, patient, and waiting. The bone man with his blue glow knows where I live now. He doesn't need to lead me through the forest anymore. He's brought the forest to me. For now, though, I'm still here, still alive, still telling this story. And each morning when I wake, having made it through another night, I count that as a victory. I spent months digging into similar experiences after what happened in the woods. Late nights at the computer while Riley slept. Endless searches through hiking forums and obscure websites dedicated to supernatural encounters. My desk gradually filled with printouts, notebooks, and maps of the Appalachian region where I'd had my experience. At first, I found only scattered accounts. A hiker from Virginia who described being led off trail by something he couldn't quite see. A woman from North Carolina who stumbled across a small cemetery that wasn't on any map. A group of college students who lost 6 hours of time while hiking near an old mining town. But as I refined my search terms and joined more specialized forums, the stories multiplied. "Just found another one," I muttered to myself one night, reading about a backpacker who'd encountered what he called a glowing figure in the fog near Cumberland Gap. His description matched what I'd seen: the blue light, the compulsion to follow, the strange fog that seemed to move with purpose. Riley worried about my obsession. I caught her watching me from the doorway some nights, concern etched across her face. I couldn't blame her. From her perspective, I'd gone from a balanced, reasonable person to someone who stayed up until 3 o'clock in the morning, reading about ghosts and time slips. "Don't you think this is keeping the trauma alive?" she asked once, bringing me coffee as dawn broke. "I need to understand it," I said, taking the mug. "There are others, Riley. I'm not crazy." After gathering enough accounts that matched my experience, I created a private forum called Threshold Crossings and invited those whose stories seemed credible. I wrote about my experience, the fog, the figure, the cemetery with my name, the search party that found nothing, and watched as 15 members joined within the first week. Their responses came quickly. I thought I was the only one. Mine happened near Mount Rogers in 2005. Did yours have blue light coming from inside what looked like a skull? Time went weird for me, too. My watch said I was only gone for 2 hours, but 3 days had passed. Each new story confirmed I wasn't alone, but none offered explanations. We shared details, compared maps, looked for patterns. Someone suggested laying our encounter locations over geological survey maps to check for fault lines or magnetic anomalies. Another member, a librarian from Kentucky, began compiling local legends from each area where incidents occurred. 6 months into my research, a new member joined our forum. Her username was appfolklore62, and her first message changed everything. My name is Eleanor Ashwood. I'm an anthropologist who spent 40 years studying Appalachian folklore. What you're describing has been documented in these mountains since at least the 1800s. I'd like to speak with you. I vetted her carefully, checked university websites, read her published papers, even called her department office. She was real. Professor Emeritus Eleanor Ashwood, renowned expert on Appalachian cultural beliefs and practices. We arranged to meet at a small coffee shop halfway between our homes. I arrived early, choosing a corner table where we could talk privately. She arrived precisely on time. A small woman in her 70s with short white hair, bright eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and a posture that suggested decades of fieldwork hadn't diminished her energy. "Wayne Roach," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for meeting me." Her grip was firm, her gaze direct as she assessed me. We ordered coffee, and once the server left, she opened a worn leather satchel and removed a notebook. "I've been collecting accounts like yours since 1970, she said, flipping through pages of neat handwriting. "The Appalachian Mountains hold secrets that academic journals can't discuss." "You believe what happened to me was real?" I asked. "The question of real is complicated," she said, sipping her coffee. "But yes, I believe you experienced something genuine. The Cherokee, Shawnee, and early Scots-Irish settlers all recorded encounters with what we might call threshold guardians." "Threshold guardians," she nodded. "They mark certain people and show them where the boundary between worlds is thin. In Cherokee tradition, they're linked to burial grounds that exist in multiple realities. Early settlers took these beliefs and called them bone men or death walkers." Her words sent a chill through me. "What does it mean to be marked by one?" "That's what most people misunderstand," she said, leaning forward. "Being marked isn't necessarily a death sentence, though many interpret it that way, because of the cemetery visions and the grave markers. It's more accurately described as an invitation. An invitation to what? To cross over, to walk between worlds. The guardian recognizes something in you, a sensitivity perhaps, or a connection to the land itself. It shows you the threshold as a sort of offering." I thought about the pull I'd felt, the compulsion to follow the figure deeper into the forest. "Why me? I'm just a hiker." Eleanor smiled. "Perhaps that's precisely why people who spend time in wild places, especially alone, become attuned to things others miss. The important thing to understand is that while the guardian may be persistent, the choice to follow remains yours. So, I'm not going to die on the date I saw on the headstone. Time works differently for these entities. What you saw was a possibility, not a certainty." She closed her notebook. "I've documented cases of people who were marked and lived decades beyond their death dates. The cemetery you found exists, but not as we usually understand it." We talked for hours. Eleanor shared stories from people across 5 states who had similar experiences. She explained how caves, ridges, and old forests were more likely to host these threshold areas. By the time we parted, I had pages of notes and a reading list of obscure texts on Appalachian spirituality. Over the next several months, Eleanor became a regular contributor to our forum, helping members understand their experiences through historical and cultural contexts. Some found comfort in her explanations, others remained disturbed. I fell somewhere in between, grateful for the framework to understand what had happened, but still uneasy about what it meant for my future. As the one-year anniversary of my original hike approached, I grew increasingly restless. Riley noticed my distraction, the way I'd stare out windows at dusk, how I'd pause when walking past the forest edge behind our house. "You're thinking about it again," she said one evening, as we sat on the back porch. I nodded. "Eleanor thinks anniversaries can be significant. The veil might be thinner on those dates." Riley took my hand. "What are you planning to do?" "Nothing," I said, squeezing her fingers. "I'm staying right here." But as the exact date arrived, I couldn't sleep. I lay beside Riley, watching shadows move across our bedroom ceiling, listening to the quiet rhythm of her breathing. The digital clock on our nightstand read 2:47 in the morning when I heard it. The familiar shuffling sound closer than ever before, not in distant woods, but directly outside our window. My heart raced as I carefully slipped out of bed, trying not to wake Riley. I moved to the window and parted the curtains just enough to see outside. The skeletal figure stood in our yard 20 feet from the house. Its skull glowed with that same blue light I remembered, illuminating our garden in an eerie blue glow. The world around it seemed to waver and distort, as though reality itself bent in its presence. It stood perfectly still, those empty eye sockets fixed on my window. Then slowly, it raised one skeletal arm and extended those long bone fingers toward me. The same beckoning gesture I remembered from the forest. The pull hit me immediately, that strange compulsion that wasn't quite my own thought, urging me to go outside, to follow once more. My hand moved to the window latch of its own accord. For a moment, I felt my body ready to obey, to slip downstairs and out the door into the night. The promise of answers, of understanding what waited beyond that threshold, tugged at me with surprising strength. But then Riley shifted in her sleep, mumbling something unintelligible. The small human sound broke the spell. I looked back at her, at the rise and fall of her chest under our comforter, at the life we'd built together. I turned back to the window. The figure remained patient and eternal, its hand still extended in invitation. This time, though, I closed the curtains firmly, blocking out the blue light. I made my way back to bed, my legs shaky, but my mind clear. "Wayne," Riley murmured, half awake. "Everything okay?" I slid under the covers and pulled her close, feeling her warmth against my chest. "Everything's fine," I whispered. "Go back to sleep." She nestled against me and drifted off again, but I remained awake, listening. The shuffling sounds continued outside for a while, circling our house, then gradually faded into the distance as dawn approached. Morning came with ordinary sunlight and the smell of coffee brewing. Riley went about her day, unaware of our midnight visitor. I watched her move through our kitchen, talking about weekend plans and a birthday gift for her brother, and felt a surge of gratitude for the simple reality of our life together. Later that day, I sent a message to Eleanor. It came to my house last night. I saw it from my window, but I didn't follow. Her reply came within an hour. "The choice is what matters, Wayne. Each time you choose, you define your relationship with the threshold. Neither choice is wrong, only different paths." Over breakfast the next morning, I watched Riley laugh at something on her phone, sunlight catching in her hair, and knew I had made the right decision for now. The cemetery with my name, carved in marble, would wait. The unmarked trail that would someday lead me back there would remain, hidden but persistent. Like the figure itself, I realized being marked wasn't a curse, but a sign of something to come. The Bone Man would return, maybe next year or sooner, It could show up in my yard, on a hiking trail, or out of the morning fog on a Tuesday. Always patient, always waiting. For now, though, I chose to remain on this side of the threshold. I chose morning coffee and Riley's laughter, family dinners and work deadlines, stubbed toes and tax forms. The beautiful ordinariness of living. The other world, with its blue light and ancient secrets, would always be there calling silently, from just beyond the edge of what I could see. But not today.